I'm Laura Bonnell, and this is the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast coming to you from Detroit. Please subscribe and even rate and comment on our podcasts when it moves you. I learn something new with every podcast, and I'm always inspired by the people that are showcased here. We don't give medical advice. You need to connect with your doctor for that. I hope that this Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast educates you and sparks some volunteering or advocacy. The CF community needs people like you. Thanks to our sponsors, Viatris and Vertex, for their support. Sorcha Slyvester-Martin, from Diagnosis to Drugs and Discovery. We do talk about suicide in this podcast. If this is a trigger for you, the topic does come up. The National Suicide Hotline is 988. You can text or call 988. When Sorcha was 3 days old, she was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. She says that she had several near-death experiences. Her grandmother, her legal guardian, raised Sorcha and was her rock. Then, after her grandmother died, she struggled. Sorcha started using drugs to numb herself from the struggles of her physical and mental illness. This went on for about 2 years, and then she focused on getting healthy. Today, she relies on movement, nutrition, and self-care to stay present and optimize her quality of life. She's passionate about raising awareness about addiction and holistic treatment of health, of wellness among the chronic illness community. She's also a certified health and wellness coach. Sorcha works with an organization called Face It Together, a nonprofit that helps others impacted by addiction to get well. Sorcha, thank you so much for reaching out. I'm so glad that I now know who you are. And it's always great to hear from people in the CF community, because it is wonderful to feature as many people as we can. You live in Colorado Springs, and you have a different path than so many others that we have featured on the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. So thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
You were diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at 3 days old. That's very early. You were born in 1998. So this is many years before cystic fibrosis was tested for in newborn screening. That didn't start until 2007. So tell us what happened and how you were diagnosed at 3 days old.
So I'm not sure the actual method of testing that they used. I'm kind of skim on that detail, but I do know there was a situation where I essentially swallowed, like when I was coming out, I believe, just kind of the waste that comes out of you when you're still in the womb. And so they had to do this kind of emergency suction, like suctioning that out, and discovered something that led them to do the testing. And so, yeah, diagnosed, confirmed at 3 days old. And then I spent about a month or so, I know at least, in the hospital before I was allowed to go home, just monitoring my overall health.
Tell us how young your parents were, and then we'll talk about how overwhelming this must have been for them.
My mother was 18 and my dad was 20. So yes, definitely very young. They did not really know what to do with a medically fragile child, and they were going through a lot of their own things in life. So I'm sure it was really difficult for them. I do remember my mom telling me that she would just hold me to her every single night, and just every time I would cough or make any sort of noise, she just had so much anxiety all the time. So yeah, it sounds rough.
I know you don't want to go into in-depth detail about all your parents were going through, but just mention a little bit of what was happening before your grandmother took over care for you.
Yeah, so like I said, they were both going through a lot. Both of my parents, before I was born, were using a lot of drugs. And when my mom got pregnant with me, she stopped, to my knowledge, as soon as she found out. But my dad was still using, and he was also very involved with the legal system and got into a lot of trouble. So after I was born, a situation arose where he thought he was basically going to go to prison for a very long time. And so my grandmother stepped in to take custody of me because she also felt better equipped to, take care of a medically fragile child. And shortly after she got custody of me, my mom went to a different state. And so I saw her kind of sporadically throughout my childhood. And then my dad ended up actually being able to stay out for the most part. And so I saw him on weekends regularly growing up.
And not that it really matters, but your grandmother was whose parent, your mom or your dad's?
My dad's.
Your grandmother is wonderful. She sounds wonderful. I know you're going to tell us about her, but how do you feel as a child with cystic fibrosis that your parents, your biological parents, aren't able to care for you?
It wasn't a huge deal. I do feel like as someone with CF, I was aware of a lot of things at a very young age, but I had my grandmother, she really was a rock for me. She really did do her absolute best and took good care of me. And so I at least had that really healthy relationship with her to kind of guide me through that. But it was difficult. I knew kind of the circumstances, but I couldn't really explain those to anybody as a child. And I did have a lot of hurt and resentment around my mom for a really long time. I even remember one of my friends coming over and saying to me, oh, my mom told your mom, she was meaning my grandmother, that your mom didn't want you. And I freaked out on her because, I'm a child. I don't know how to process what's going on. All I know is that, I haven't seen my mom in years. So it was really difficult for a long time. And I've just now recently in the past couple of years been able to form a really healthy relationship with both of my parents and figure out how to navigate those relationships with not having the same type of connection of actually growing up and being raised by them. So it's been a journey for sure. But I think because of how much effort my grandma put in and the kind of person that she was, it really saved me a lot of additional hurt and turmoil mentally and emotionally that could have been there.
It sounds like what your grandmother did saved both of your parents.
Yeah, I think she really, I don't know the details again because I was a year old, but I definitely think her stepping in really enabled us to have the relationship that we do now. And, she still made an effort to have me see them as much as possible and stuff like that, given certain circumstances. Of course, that changed over the years, but she really did her best to make sure that I knew that they loved me and that they were just going through their own things and didn't really have the ability at that time to take proper care of me. So she never spoke ill of them. She was always very encouraging of seeing them and having that relationship with them. So I think that, again, she did the absolute best she possibly could have done.
And you say that your grandmother Mary was the best and you have since lost your grandmother. But what did she do for you? And how did she raise a child with cystic fibrosis?
Oh, man. I mean, she just put so much effort into making sure that I knew that I was capable, which I think is a huge thing for individuals with CF and anyone in the chronic illness community, because she would put me in all these different hobbies and she was trying to help me find something to live for and be passionate about and feel connected, because you do tend to feel really isolated, I think, a lot of the times with CF, and you can feel like you're not capable. For instance, I was in dance for years when I was a kid and I loved dance. I was really good at it, but I would keep getting sick and I started missing recitals. And so I ended up having to quit. And that same pattern happened so many times throughout my childhood, where I would start doing something, I'd get really excited about it, really passionate, and then I wouldn't be able to continue or kind of move forward to the next milestone because of my illness. But she was relentless about, no, do things, I'm not going to let you just sit here and be sad and be sick. You need something that gives you joy in life, because my CF was very severe. I mean, I had multiple near-death experiences before the age of 14. And so I think that motivation she gave me to, you can do anything that you want to do. You just have to work a little bit harder. And then the support that she gave me was unmatched, and holding me when I was sick and just really being there as a physical, mental, and emotional support through the ups and downs that is CF was it's the number one thing that I'm like super appreciative of for her, in knowing that you can accept support and help and that you can do things when you have this kind of illness, that it doesn't make you unable to live your life. You just have to do things a little differently or maybe work a little harder in certain aspects.
And when you talk about your near-death experience, was this cystic fibrosis related?
Yeah.
Was it an exacerbation, or can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah. So one of them was when my appendix ruptured, and that almost caused some pretty serious, they basically told me if I hadn't come in right when I did, I probably would have died. That one was really intense. The other one, I almost died from malnutrition a few times, and I had to get a feeding tube because no matter how much I ate, I could not gain weight. I could not keep weight. And so every time I got sick, it just completely wrecked my body. So I ended up having to get a feeding tube. There were a few that were from lung infections, and I have very specific memories of doctors telling my family, like, I need you to prepare because we don't think she's going to make it through the night. And I have a very vivid memory of my grandmother as well, like crying, holding my hand, saying, if you need to let go, it is okay. I'm going to cry, sorry, but I'm going to be really sad. But I understand, like, you don't need to suffer if you feel like you need to go. It's okay. And so there were a few of those experiences, unfortunately.
And that is obviously so scary for everyone.
Yeah.
The fear and how scared your grandmother must have been also. And I don't know if she had support. I mean, we often talk about what the person with CF is going through, but also the caregivers too are going through so much, and they have to be strong, right? So what did your grandmother do? And then what were you able to do when you were looking for strength? Was she always your strength? And then again, who was she able to find strength in?
I mean, she definitely was my strength for a really long time. I honestly had a pretty dark mindset when I was younger. After a certain point, I think after a couple of those experiences where I just didn't have too much of a will to live, I had a will to survive. But I think living and surviving are very different things. But she definitely, like, I guess hearing that, as I mentioned earlier, where she was like, you can let go, and seeing her face and how terrified she was and how sad she was always a huge motivator for me to take care of myself as a kid, because I honestly was not good at it. I wasn't good about taking my enzymes or doing my breathing treatments. I was very much in denial for a very long time about my illness, but I did it, for the sake of my family. In other words, not only her, but everybody else, because I didn't want them to be sad. And as far as her support goes, I know she had two really amazing best friends that I saw all the time growing up. One of them was I call her my other mother, but my nanny who took care of me. I grew up with her daughters, so I call all of them my sisters. So that whole family was very supportive to her. I know that she and my dad butted heads a lot about my treatments and things like that, but I know that he was also a big support. Like, he was very much there for her and for me as much as he could be with everything that he had going on. And, my grandpa, even though they were divorced before I even moved in with her, he was always really supportive of her. So she had a good support system. I don't know how much she reached out, being the type of person that she was, but I do know that when times were tough, she did have really good people around her that would come, relieve her from the hospital so she could go have a break and stuff like that too. So everybody was pretty involved and very knowledgeable of everything going on. She was very transparent about everything. So I think that she did have a good support system.
That's wonderful and good to hear. And I think there's so much guilt going around for everyone when it comes to compliance. I mean, my daughters, you can't be perfect at your treatments. You can't. I don't know anyone who's a smoker who is perfect about quitting, right? Or anybody who's dieting who is perfect about dieting, or someone who has maybe allergies who's perfect about taking their meds. I could go on and on and on. But I think it's almost impossible to be perfect 365 days a year doing your treatments and never missing.
Yeah.
That's quite a regimen. And I think that doctors are being a little more realistic now. But I know with my girls, when you were starting out expecting perfection to follow compliance, and we ended up lying sometimes. And saying lying is a harsh way to describe it. I think it was just you're trying to survive and not shame your kids, or they're trying to just make the doctor happy. Yep, we did every treatment. We've done everything right. And you just can't possibly. I mean, did you feel that as well, that you were just kind of doing the best that you could?
Yeah, I think you're right. All of the regimen that you have to do, or at least that you're told to do, is just such a huge weight. Like, it's so time consuming for everybody involved, especially, not only us, but caregivers. And it is just taxing. So I would say she did her best to make sure that I got what I needed. But when I was alone, I was really bad about it. I did not want to do anything. And there were a lot of times where I would lie, like I would shove my enzymes in the trash or in couch cushions or something like that, because I just was so in denial about it. And I didn't have that connection in my brain yet, of like, this will make you feel better. And I think that's the reason it was so severe. And I felt so terrible all the time and got so sick so frequently, because I just refused. And I would go through these phases of lying to the doctors and saying, yeah, I did everything right. I don't know why I feel so bad, or my lung function is so terrible, or I can't digest any of this food. And my grandma would look at me like, I think I know you a little bit better than that. But I think in the same regard, like, she didn't want to shame me. She knew how hard it was already. And she knew that I did it enough where I wanted to survive. It was just hard being a kid and having all of that put on you at such a young age, and having to take so much time out of your day and so much time away from people and be so isolated, it'd be for fear of getting sick or passing that along to somebody else, that we did the best we could. But I think everybody knew the reality.
And I think, too, you don't have a sibling that, well, you don't have a sibling, right? And you don't have a sibling that has cystic fibrosis, or you don't know other people maybe that are spending so much time doing treatments, that there's that going on with you as well. I assume that your friends can just go out and play. They don't have to do treatments before they go to school. Was that also playing a part?
Yeah. I was raised an only child. I do have 4 half siblings now, but they weren't there until I was a lot older. So I didn't know anybody else who was going through something like that. I mean, I made, a couple pen pal type friends in the hospital here and there, but there wasn't anybody I was close to that had to do any of these things. So it was easier for me as a child to just deny it and not even talk about it until the point where I got really sick and I kind of had to disclose that information to people in my life. And I wasn't necessarily afraid to do so, but in my day-to-day life, I definitely didn't want to be in the cafeteria taking my enzymes, and everybody's like, what is that? What are you doing? Or doing breathing treatments. But I did kind of have to get over that at a point, because I made the decision to start coming home and doing IV antibiotics. So I would go to school with a PICC line in my arm. So eventually that faded, and I had to just kind of deal with it and come to acceptance of that and be a little more comfortable. But for a long time, I did not talk to anybody about it, or it was really isolating, I think, as a kid.
Were you going to therapy at any point up until your grandmother died?
Yes, I was in therapy, I think when I was 11, right after I got my feeding tube. And I was in there for a couple years. And then I went back, and that was mostly for the medical trauma. I got diagnosed with CPTSD. From those experiences, lots of experiences. And then I had really severe depression and some pretty bad anxiety as well, which I think are kind of come hand in hand a lot of the times with chronic illness. But yeah, I was in therapy on and off from the age of 11 to about the age of 22.
And how old were you when your grandmother died?
I was 14.
14. So that's when you told me that everything kind of spiraled out of control for you. So tell us what happened then at that point.
Yeah. So, she got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and she did go through treatment for a little bit. And of course, that was difficult for everybody to see and for her to go through. And it was a very odd dynamic for me specifically, because I was so used to being the patient that role of being reversed was just somehow so uncomfortable. And I really tried to be the caretaker for her, at 13 years old. And just kind of nothing I was doing was helping. So it just felt very, very difficult the whole time, because I didn't know how to help her, if there's anything I could do. And so when she told all of us that she was going to stop treatment, she had been through the ringer. She was miserable. Cancer is awful, But when she told us all she was stopping treatment, I was very kind of selfishly, absolutely just not okay. It was devastating, of course. That is a given. But I was just like, I'm going to lose the only person that I truly, really 100% know loves me and cares about me. And it was just really weird for me. And so after she passed away, I was supposed to originally go live with my aunt per her will. But, this was written back when I was a child, when my parents were still going through a lot of things of their own. And my dad had spoken up and said, well, hey, I'm okay now. I will take care of my daughter. And me wanting to form a better relationship with him, I agreed to that. That may not have been the greatest decision for either of us, but we made it work. But in that about 2 years after she actually passed away, I wasn't even here. I don't know how to explain it. I just kind of completely disassociated from life. I had never been in a darker spot in my head before, because up until that point, I didn't have a lot of good coping skills or emotional regulation skills or any of those things. And I was codependent on my grandmother. She was my reason for continuing to fight, I guess. And so when I lost that, I had to really do some reevaluation of, do I even want to live? And I apologize if this is a trigger for anybody, but I was very suicidal and very I was cutting myself. I was doing all of those types of things. And where addiction kind of came into play for me at first was because of that situation. I just didn't want to be there, and I didn't want to feel this way. I would go between feeling absolutely terrible and feeling nothing at all. And it was very difficult in my mental health. And so she had this stock of pain medication from her treatment. And even though I have taken it before for surgeries, I started taking this pain medication with the intent of basically slowly committing suicide. And in my brain at the time, again, this is a very dark place to be. I'm happy I'm out of this. But in my brain at the time, I was thinking, my family has expected me to die my entire life. So if I can do this slowly, they'll already expect it, and it won't be as devastating for them as the situation with my grandmother just was, or if I were to do something more drastic. So that's where my train of thought was at with that. And thankfully, that specific train of thought was short-lived, because I would say maybe about a month or two after I started taking those, I woke up on my friend's floor with her hand in my throat. And apparently I had taken too many and I blacked out or something like that. And after that, I just never, that desire was gone, and I just never took them again. And I purposely, not for fear of liking it at all or wanting to take it a lot, but just that experience, I just have zero interest in painkillers. And I think I've taken them twice since then for surgeries. But I was definitely still in that dark mindset. And I was in high school now, and I was being exposed to all sorts of things. So I just started doing whatever. Thankfully, I never went down the path of the harder things like heroin or meth, but I dabbled in pretty much everything else and ended up landing on cannabis, various forms of cannabis. And then I did that as a coping mechanism for 7 years, I believe. So that was a little past the right after it happened mark of your question, but
no, it's just very honest of you to share everything. And sadly, I'm sure some people can relate. And hopefully you will keep people from going down this path, having told them of the path you were on. And I'm curious too, you're in therapy, and I know people can lie isn't the right word, but can evade the truth of, when you're in therapy, you can change what's really happening when you're speaking to them. Is that what you were doing? Were you not kind of sharing what was really happening with you?
Yeah, to be very honest and transparent with you, I was very good at that. I was very good at evading. I was very good at telling people what they wanted to hear. It was very obvious to everybody that I was mentally not doing well, but I was able to play it off as like, I'm making it, I'm okay. And I had the same therapist forever. Like, she was actually kind of a family friend, not super close, but they trusted her. And I did really like her. I did trust her. And so it kind of changed from working on my medical trauma to now the trauma of my grandmother passing away. And that became a huge thing. And then, of course, working through other childhood experiences that I had, like there was some sexual assault and stuff as well in my adolescence as well. So there's just so many things. But I honestly feel like talk therapy for me was helpful, but mostly in a sense of it just made me painfully aware of kind of what I was thinking and my thoughts and emotions and my own, I don't necessarily want to say toxic, but my less favorable traits and tendencies and things, which is good to be aware of. But that whole time, yes, I was definitely just telling people what they wanted to hear. And honestly, I don't like the word manipulate, but figuring out how to just get people to believe I was okay so I didn't have to do this very much. And it wasn't until I was an adult and actually started putting focus onto my mental health that I went back on my own accord with the intention of helping. Whereas before it was kind of a like, you need to do this because you're clearly depressed. And it was more of a forced thing. So I did not like being there at all.
And I'm so glad still that you had a therapist, even though you admittedly talk about, how you were handling it, and that you saved yourself with the help of others. Thank God you're here. And I'm so glad that you're sharing your story because I know people can relate. So you have saved yourself, worked with a therapist, you're telling your story. Tell us how your life changed when you finally were truthful with yourself and your therapist, your father, your friends, and then how your life took off from that point.
Yeah, so I would say it started when I was about 17. It kind of started with my physical health, like kind of an awareness that a lot of the things that I had been doing, I'd been through a lot of experimental treatments throughout the years, as they do have for CF. I was on 20 plus medications, prescription medications at one point, plus, of course, breathing treatments, vest nebulizers, all the things, enzymes. And it just kind of hit me at one point, like, what I've been doing for years is not working. It's just not. So I just started doing my own research and my trial and error. And this is by no means a suggestion to do so. Definitely, coordinate with professionals and people that know things. But my little rebellious brain, I was like, this is just simply not working and I'm not doing it anymore. So it started with my nutrition.
Before you go on about the nutrition, I just want to say, because we were just talking about suicide, that there is the National Suicide Hotline. It's 988-SUICIDE. You can call it. You can text it. They have chat. They have a website. We also have these links in our show notes in this episode. It's 24 hours, the suicide hotline, and it's in many different languages. So I just wanted to point that out as we're talking about this very serious topic. So please continue about your nutrition and how that helped changing that up.
Yeah, no, that is a very good thing to add in. Please reach out if you need it, please. But yes, nutrition. So it started with that. And I just started realizing I think I have a lot of, not necessarily to the extreme of allergies, but definitely sensitivities. And so I started kind of figuring that out and slowly cutting things out. Like I stopped drinking soda and all these carbonated things. I really tried to cut out sugar as much as possible, dairy, because I know that can kind of give the thing of making your mucus thicker and stuff like that. So I just started kind of cutting out things that are just obviously bad for you and, fast food, stuff like that. Got my nutrition back on track. I started feeling so much better, had so much less, problems with my digestive system. And I was like, okay, so that kind of motivated me to keep going with that. And then it was what I put on the outside of my body, like skincare and makeup. And because I was one of those kids who I really liked wearing makeup in high school, but it would make me break out and I was so red and I thought I had rosacea and like all of these things. And nope, I'm just a sensitive Sally. So I stopped wearing makeup and started making my own beauty products when I was in high school. And that helped a lot as well. And then it kind of pieced into later, I started dating in my adulthood. I started dating a bodybuilder and got really into the gym and exercise. And that was an absolute game changer for me. And so once I had gotten my physical health back to a baseline, and I also kind of I started replacing a lot of these like prescription medications with more natural supplements and alternatives. And that doesn't work for everybody, but it did definitely work for me. I think my body was just too damaged, to be honest, to handle a lot of the side effects and stuff that comes with a lot of those prescription medications. So other than my nebulizers and my enzymes, I stopped taking all my prescription medications. And then, in 2020, I started taking a CF modulator. And that was a game changer for me as well. So right around then, after I had gotten my physical health at a really good baseline and I was feeling a lot better, I started questioning, okay, why is my mental health still so bad? It had definitely improved over the years, but I'm like, okay, I haven't been to the hospital in years. I haven't had to have a tune-up in a few years now. Why is my mental health still so bad? Like, why am I still struggling with this so much? And then I finally kind of made a connection of, okay, well, I'm still doing things every day, mostly smoking weed, which I should have also not been smoking because I have a lung disease.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'm like, come on, Sorcha, but are definitely affecting my mental health and as well as my physical health, mostly the smoking, because I had gotten a medical card when I was 18 because, cannabis in a medicinal purpose, I do have some belief that I do think that can be used medicinally and it's beneficial. But, that's minimal compared to the way that 90% of people use it. Like people really, really overuse things. And so I started making that connection and exploring that a little bit more. And I did go back to therapy intentionally for a lot of things and discovered a lot of things about myself that I hadn't faced before. Like, again, my less favorable tendencies and things like that and mindsets, especially about myself and about other people. I was a very fearful individual growing up due to some things that had happened. So I was very scared of people and I was very scared of speaking up. I am a recovering people pleaser. Lots of things that I had to work through in order to get to this point where I could kind of take care of myself and feel like I was worth taking care of. And then I just kind of got into this space of health and wellness because of all of that stuff and became a health and wellness coach. I got a certification. And the more that I learned, the more I wanted to know and the more that I wanted to, figure out this holistic approach to improving quality of life. Because before all of that happened, I didn't think I was going to live past 18. And I didn't think I was ever going to have a quality of life where I could have a full-time job or be in a healthy relationship or ever have kids or any of these things. I didn't think I was going to be able to do any of these things. So as I started feeling better and better and got more and more interested into figuring out how can I just continue to improve my quality of life.
Doing this podcast, doing my foundation, I always say is my therapy. And I would imagine what you're doing, the wellness coaching, is also a little bit of therapy for you as well. Is that true?
It definitely is. Yeah, it is very, very rewarding not only is it rewarding, especially in the job that I have now, which is the, addiction management / recovery coach, because I get to share this story with people that used to be so painful and I used to hide from people. And now it's literally, it's validating people's experiences and it's helping them and it's making them aware that change is possible and improving your quality of life is possible and that you don't have to feel isolated or stuck in this, darker mindset or this place of life where you just feel like it's just not worth living. And then, you get to hear the wisdom of all of these other people and all of these experiences and just how connected everybody really is in their experience of life, especially, unfortunately so, but especially, through more like traumatic experiences or tougher times and emotions. But just how similar everyone's experience is really interesting to me. And just having the ability to use the things that I've been through and the knowledge I've gained in order to help people is the most rewarding, satisfying thing I've ever done in my life.
And Sorcha, you're such an inspiration to so many. I know people are going to come away from this podcast feeling so much hope. You're working now with a nonprofit called Face It Together. So you just started talking about that, but what is your experience with this nonprofit that you're coaching other people?
Yeah, it's an amazing program. So we just offer peer coaching services to individuals struggling with addiction as well as their loved ones / caregivers, because I think that population is also so underlooked. So that's a big thing that sets us apart from a lot of other people doing the same thing. And I discovered this job because I had my health and wellness certification. I had a part-time job as a coach doing that. But as far as a full-time job for the sake of survival, I was just basically working in administrative healthcare for years, and I didn't like it at all. But I decided I'm going to find a job that really fills my soul, that really speaks to me, that, aligns with my values and kind of my mission in life, which I had decided was to become a healer more so. And so I found this job and it just sounded too good to be true, honestly. I was like, is this a scam? But I applied for it anyway, and I ended up getting the job. And just the culture here is unmatched. I could not speak highly enough of it, honestly. The number one thing I think I'll take away from it is the focus on wellness and of everybody involved, of the members that come to us for coaching, of all of the staff and of the company as a whole. Like there's just such a holistic approach and such a deep, genuine, authentic consideration and care for people that I think that really does transfer, especially, via coworker onto all of our members, because they can just feel that. And that's the number one compliment I think we've received in reviews and whatnot, is that like these people really care, and whatever recovery looks like for you, like that's what their goal is, to help you get there. There's no limitations, there's no restrictions, there's no judgment. It's just purely, where are you at? Let's meet you where you're at. Let's get you to where you want to be, and let's improve your quality of life so that you feel like it's really worth living and fighting for. Because it is a fight, once you're struggling with addiction, to fight that on a daily basis in order to have the life that you want to live.
It sounds wonderful for everyone involved there, and I applaud you for what you're doing, and I'm so glad you're doing so well. I also wanted to say, the Bonnell Foundation has a mentoring program that's non-medical advice, but I'm going to talk to you about that because I think you would be a great young mentor as part of our program that we're just kicking off. So we will get into that as well, because I think younger voices, even though you don't have a child with cystic fibrosis, I think that either helping a young parent who maybe just had a child with CF, you would have information and perspective that parents wouldn't necessarily have. So it's very interesting. And I also wanted to end on, how is your relationship now with your parents? You touched on it briefly. How has that evolved, and how are you feeling with your mom and dad?
Yeah, so I do have really good relationships with them now. I think I see my mom more than my dad, more so just because of schedules. And my mom and I like to do a lot of the same things. I'm definitely her daughter. But yeah, on both sides, we've had, the hard conversations. I actually had one with my dad recently that was very healing, where he just went into detail of what happened right after I was born. Again, didn't want to share too much detail on that for his sake, but it was very healing for both of them to really acknowledge, their shortcomings in that time, but also give me their perspective because, as a kid, you're not really able to see that. So we had some really good, hard, emotional conversations. And then the forgiveness of those things on my side was a huge weight off of my shoulders, which I kind of came to maybe about 2 years ago and just started slowly kind of almost forming a new relationship with them, like just kind of accepting that it was never going to be the type of connection it would have been if I were raised by them, but that I can choose to have a relationship with them now. And there's certain things we'll have to navigate on both sides because they're honestly both very different people. But I have a good relationship with them now. I have a pretty good relationship with all my little brothers. I have 4 half brothers, 1 on my dad's side, 3 on my mom's side. And I see them all pretty frequently. And so I'm very happy that I, was able to give that forgiveness and I was able to form that relationship with them. And I'm very grateful for having those relationships now and that life and experience has led to the point where we can still have that relationship despite what happened when I was so young.
That is wonderful. And as far as your future goes, what do you see in your future? Do you see yourself being married, having kids? What do you see down your road?
Yeah, as far as personal life, I definitely would love to find a life partner. I am open to kids. I've always wanted kids. It kind of depends. I'm okay either way at this point, I think, in my life, but that is something I've always looked forward to is being a mom. So hopefully that will work out for me. Career-wise, I am continuing on in studying naturopathic medicine. So I do plan to finish getting my bachelor's degree and then go on to get a doctorate in naturopathic medicine. I am currently studying herbal medicine right now and getting a certification for that. And it is just kind of my goal to take the work I'm doing here at Face It Together, my health coaching, as well as all of that knowledge to kind of just be a very holistic, I like the word healer more than doctor, but healer to specifically individuals who struggle with chronic illness and addiction, and just kind of bring that awareness to the world in favor of one of my idols, Claire Wineland, as we all know in the CF community, and just kind of bring that authentic approach to that and be very real about things, but also be very real about the fact that we have the ability to improve our quality of life and just kind of throw out all the options and see what works for people and kind of help them figure that out. So that's what I hope for my future.
It is wonderful. And I'm so glad that you're doing well. It's so beautiful that you've shared your truth and everything that you've been through, because like I've said throughout this podcast, you're definitely going to help someone. So thank you for sharing your story. We really appreciate it.
I really appreciate you having me on and being able to speak on that to this community, because this is definitely my passion to keep working with people with CF specifically. So
thank you.
The original music in this podcast is performed by Kevin Allen.
It's not complicated.
Who happens to have cystic fibrosis.
We all got our worries and fears. I know it's got you frustrated, but loving you is so alright.
This has been the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. For more information and to learn more about the Bonnell Foundation, visit our website at thebonnellfoundation.org. That's the BONNELL Foundation.org. This podcast was sponsored by Vertex Pharmaceutical, The Science of Possibility, and Viatris. It was produced by Jag and Detroit Podcasts. Follow our show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now.